Pseudopod is extruded into this universe from a dimension of purest fear. It's beautiful in its own alien way, but what's to come will unsettle you.
Pseudopod, episode 644, April 19th, 2019. This week's stories: Flash in the Borderlands. There are some X's and L's, there's a V, there's a couple of I's. I trust you people, you're well read. You've seen The Omen, you work it out. Horror Comedy Showcase.
Lead me to a lonely place, dressed for opening time. Show me bleeding where my love burns you breathing fire.
Hi folks, welcome to Pseudopod, the weekly horror podcast. I'm Alistair, your host, and remember, sometimes when you fall over in the blood, it's funny. I'm told. All joking aside, horror and comedy go hand in claw, and always have done. It's something about the collision of the unknowable with the mundane, as we find ourselves thrown headlong into something awful, but still on some level worry about whether that chicken in the fridge is off, or what key the Magnum PI theme was in. Or to put it another way, he who fights monsters should be careful lest he thereby become a monster, and if thou gaze long into an abyss, the abyss will also gaze into thee, and tell thee thy fly is undone. We have two stories for you this week, both of which have been works of Herculean labour to assemble. Massive shout out to Marty Perrette, our audio producer this month, for going above and beyond. And diving straight into The Garunding by Buzz Dixon. The Garunding was first published in the October 1987 issue of National Lampoon, and I sense the hand of Sean and Alex in this one, and I'm so pleased to see them mining this kind of material. Your readers for this story include the entire Pseudopod editorial board, I am told: Dave Robertson, John Bell, my good self, Brian Lieberman, Graham Dunlop, and Scott Campbell. So, without further ado, we have a story for you, and we all promise you it's true.
And now, some excerpts from Cacophonous Audio's forthcoming dramatic audiobook adaptation of Buzz Dixon's 1980s horror classic, The Gerunding.
It is precisely because we fear that which we fear that we are afraid of it. From Intellecto Pretenzioso by Larimo Curlius.
Prologue. Luckenbill, Maine, 1807 B.C. Konomoro, wisest of the witch doctors in the 7 tribal councils, felt uneasy deep in his red heart. The Norseman standing before him was stark naked and drenched in blood that gushed from hundreds of ornate, foreboding runes carved in his body. Surely this was an evil sign. Chapter 1.
I know you've been worried about me, honey, but I feel we can put our marriage back together and land the squiggly account if we rent this lovely old place up in Maine.
Chapter 2.
You entered the Nimrod place to alter status? Are you daft?
No, and if you know what's good for you, you'd better not go spreading any of your wild tales.
Chapter 3.
It's nothing I can put my finger on, Chester. Just this strange feeling I've had ever since we moved in.
Chapter 4. Out in the woods, something watched. Chapter 5. In the kitchen, Gwendolen felt the cold, icy caress on her inner thigh again. She shuddered and flushed in shame. Across the breakfast table from her, Chester and little Billy kept eating their 100% fortified chewy pooies with lip-smacking Choco Power flavor bits. unaware of the spectral molesting going on under her Sears Windsong Serenade terrycloth robe. Chapter 6. She never made it to the back door of the Kentucky Fried Chicken stand. From out of the shadows, eyes blazing red with a fury known only to hell, a huge shape swooped down upon her. She had time for one tiny, futile scream before the thing began rending her limb from limb. Gretchen Oglethorpe had fried her last chicken. Chapter 7.
I'm sure, Mrs. Farley. But until we find out who did, I'm going to have to question anybody who might know anything about the murder, including your husband.
Interlude. London, England.
With trembling hands he broke the brittle seals on the musty old file that hadn't been opened in over 100 years. It bulged with crumbling yellow documents. The ink had faded and the handwriting was scratchy, but he was able to read them. "By Jove," he said, "this involves the royal family."
Chapter 8.
Billy, what happened to you?
Some boys beat me up on their way home from school, Mom. They said we lived in a spook house.
Chapter 9.
Haven't you had enough, Mr. Farley?
Damn it, I'll say when I've had enough. Just keep pouring 'em and keep that damn dog away from me.
Chapter 10.
Every chicken in the coop, Sheriff. Like something scared him to death.
Chapter 11. His father had told him to never, ever look behind the musty pile of junk in the corner of the cellar. But parental admonition had never stopped a determined 9-year-old. Carefully, he moved aside a rusty old bike, a steamer trunk, some old snow tires, and 2 large china barrels. To his surprise, he found a stout oak door behind all the junk. The door swung open at the slightest touch of his hand. And inside the door... Chapter 12.
Well, something shaved all the hair off little Billy and glued chicken feathers all over him. Chester, we've got to get out of here.
You'd like that, wouldn't you? You'd like to see me fail and crawl back to New York City with my tail tucked between my legs.
Chapter 13. Vomiting huge gouts of thickly congealed blood. Chapter 14. Stepping over his deputy, who had fainted when he saw the carnage, Sheriff Holcomb shook his head.
Another one.
Chapter 15.
He was home all night. Honest, Sheriff.
Chapter 16. Billy knew he'd have to go down into the cellar again. Chapter 17. That night, her spectral lover took her with greater force, greater passion than ever before. In the midst of her ecstasy, she cast a worried glance at Chester. Deep in his drunken stupor, he frowned at the violent jostling of the bed and rolled over on his side. Chapter 18.
Come on in, Squirt. I like little boys.
Chapter 19.
Where the hell's Billy? I want to show him this keen new axe I bought.
Chapter 20.
Then, 6 months later, in the spring of 1909, the Carson family moved in. 6 in all, as I recollect. This time the carnage was even worse than usual.
Chapter 21.
You scared the hell out of your mother, you little dipshit. I don't want you talking to some half-baked old bitch who makes her living telling fairy tales to damn tourists. You pull a half-ass stunt like that again and I'll knock your motherfucking brains out with the back of my hand! Now say grace so we can eat.
Interlude. Luckenbill, Maine. The trail had led him from England across Europe to Turkey, around the Mediterranean, over the Atlantic, through the dankest bowels of New York, and now stopped cold in Luckenbill, Maine. Chapter 22.
Just the wind?
Chapter 23.
No. No. Oh my God, no!
Chapter 24.
Hey, Sheriff, look at this. Some kind of charred circle in the grass and what looks like runes written around it.
Chapter 25.
I said I don't want any damn cottage cheese. How many times do I have to slap this into your head, huh? I don't want any damn cottage cheese!
Chapter 26.
Daddy's been having a rough time, Billy.
Chapter 27. The 16 Hells Angels were sitting on their big black Harley-Davidsons. One, less stupid than the others, nudged his friend. He pointed through the thick marijuana haze to the lone figure walking down the road.
A citizen,
he said, making it sound like a cheap, dirty word.
Let's roust him.
Chapter 28.
I don't believe it. 15 Hells Angels wiped out, and all the survivor can say is that the attacker was 8 feet tall, had glowing red eyes, and wings. Wings, for shit's sake. I don't believe it.
Chapter 29.
I'd appreciate if you got off my front porch, pig.
You'd better be nice to me, Farley, 'cause next time I'm coming back with a search warrant.
Chapter 30. Deep under the black, still waters of Lake Tichimooney, something stirred. Chapter 31.
Perhaps I can help you, Sheriff. Sloane's the name. Scotland Yard.
Chapter 32.
Billy, run! Go tell the sheriff.
Chapter 33.
Wait a minute, kid. Widow Bradley. She told you this? Hell, Widow Bradley's been dead 15 years.
Chapter 34.
Chester, no, don't!
Chapter 35.
Send an ambulance up to the Farley place, not that she needs it any longer, and put out an APB on Chester Farley. White male Caucasian, yellow hair, 8 feet tall, red eyes, large wings.
Chapter 36.
There! Look! My God! What is it? It is, or was, Chester Farley. Now shoot! Shoot! Shoot!
Chapter 37.
Things have been happening to me that I don't understand, Billy. You've got to believe me.
I believe you, Dad. Now untie me.
Chapter 38.
Dash it all! Don't you stupid American blokes understand? It wasn't Chester Farley at all. It was...
Chapter 39.
In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost, I abjure thee to come out of this body.
Chapter 40.
Mommy? Daddy? What have I done? Where are they?
Now, you just hush. You're with Widow Bradley now. Everything's going to be all right.
Epilogue. Deep in the dank, stinking sewers of Calcutta, a baby that was human in outward appearance only cried and thirsted for blood.
I love this. I actually love this for relatively serious reasons too. Firstly, I have watched so many of this horror movie, and it's honestly rather touching to be able to be part of it. You know the drill. Unknown evil, sudden violence as everyone realises it's the 70s and the internet is years away. Brit who knows the truth, beheading, Gregory Peck, home for tea in the apocalypse. It's comforting because it's familiar, but it still has fangs. It can still frighten us. And the fact you can render a story like this down to these exciting audio postcards proves that not only is it eminently parodyable, which is a word now, but it's also a really strong narrative framework. And I love those. And really, next time, folks, listen to the Brit Occult Detective. They know things.
We interrupt our regularly scheduled programming to bring you a word from our sponsors, AMC Shudder. Check out Shudder's great content at Shudder.com and use promo code Pseudopod for a free 30-day trial. Shudder is a premium streaming video service super serving fans of all degrees with the best selection of horror and thrillers. Shudder has the largest, fastest-growing, human-curated selection of thrilling and dangerous entertainment. Shudder also has their own original podcasts like History of Horror Uncut and She Kills. Let's first tell you about the podcast, The History of Horror Uncut. All 10 episodes were released on Shudder on February 22nd. The show consists of extended and uncut interviews between Eli Roth and the most sentimental genre filmmakers in history. Hosted by Shudder curator Sam Zimmerman, guests include Stephen King, Quentin Tarantino, Josh Hartnett, plus a roundtable with Rob Zombie, Greg Nicotero, and Eli Roth. Next, let's tell you about the podcast She Kills. All 10 episodes were released on Shudder on March 1st, timed with Women's History Month. This is a non-fiction podcast hosted by Adrienne Barbeau of The Fog and Creepshow. Women have always had a prominent place in the genre. This show explores the beginnings of horror, where women were kill fodder, to the standalone modern women of horror who broke the mold, featuring the dynamic actresses from those films. They're going from Babe in the Woods to Badass with a Shotgun, and everything in between, with unique and richly interesting conversations that only women in horror who love horror and who examine horror can provide. Guests include Barbara Crampton, Dee Wallace, Jennifer Tilly, and many more. To check out these shows or to experience Shudder's other great content, head over to Shudder.com and use promo code Pseudopod for a free 30-day trial. Now, back to our regularly scheduled programming.
Next up, Mama is a Four-Letter Word by Chris Sundberg. This was first published in Impact Press in 1999 and Chronogram in 2002. And again, we have a veritable murderer's row here, from the top down. This story is read by Dave Robertson, John Bell, Karen Bovenmeyer, Alex Hoffelick, Brian Lieberman, Austin's daughter, Scott Campbell, Kate Castelline, Austin Malone, and Danny Daly. So, once again, and with massive thanks to our vast choirs of narrators this week, we have a story for you. And we promise you, it's true.
Mama is a Four-Letter Word by Chris Sundberg. Excerpted from Goodbye, Mother, From Shadow to Darkfall, The Untold Story of the Sunnydale One. Forthcoming from This So-Called Playground Press, LLC. Ray Toomey, age 13.
I knew her. All the kids did. She was a real hard-ass. I mean, Ralph had me over one time. We were about 9. We started eating cookies from this totally innocuous jar with pictures of Disney characters on it, you know. Very obviously innocent. And bang, out of nowhere, she shows up.
What do you think you're doing? It's only an hour till dinner time. You know that?
What can we say? She was always asking embarrassing questions. What do you think you're doing? Where are you going? What do you mean out? She seemed to get pleasure from putting kids on the spot.
Linda Squenton, age 14.
I think she found me threatening as a woman. Although I was only 7 or 8 when I was closest to her, she once said to me I should put the top half of my bikini back on. That I would have to someday anyway. She couldn't handle displays of femininity, sexuality. Looking back on it, I can see she was clinically repressed. She was uncomfortable with my body, with Ralph's body, with her own body. Never once in all the years I knew them did I stumble into a room to find either of them nude.
Anthony Vlepp, age 15.
I had what you might call a business relationship with the deceased. I mowed her lawn. I did this because of the well-known tension between her and her son Ralph. His only outlet for aggression, since he was a minor, was to refuse to do chores. Although she still paid him an allowance, she was just controlling him with money. She was pretty tight with the dinero. I remember finishing her lawn on a lot of occasions. She would squint at it, as if looking for screw-ups to pick at, saying all the while, "What a fine job you do, Tony," in that fake, sincere voice of hers. And then she'd pay me, counting out each dollar into my hand. It's like challenging me to say, "Hey, that's only $4. I thought we agreed to $5. She never did gyp me, but I kept an eye on her. That was the idea. She had to be the center of attention.
Jack Ripland, age 16.
She had a weird, occult flair for sudden appearances. One day we were smoking, Ralph and I, behind the shed out back of his parents' house. Just 2 kids being kids, very innocent. I'd just taken a long drag and was puking onto a heap of lawn ornaments when suddenly she appears. All she says to Ralph is, "I'd like to talk to you, young man." Very quiet, very rational, like that guy in Silence of the Lambs. Ralph went with her. I didn't see him for the rest of the day. Who knows what went on in there? Anyway, after that day, I received clear signals from her that I was persona non grata at Ralph's. She gave out these signals. Nothing you could pin down, just this Norman Bates type thing. Even if she wasn't that crazy, and I'm no expert, she was two-faced, a real hypocrite. She never said, "Get lost, Jack, you bad influence." No, she kept inviting me over to Ralph's birthday parties, his personal jewelry outings to the malls, the whole 9 yards. She never told my folks either. It was very subtle, and for a child, kind of scary. She was a real power tripper, all right.
Mary Plecker, age 14.
I first met Ralph when we were 10 or so. He had this subtle, hunted look that really grabbed me. I wanted to mother him, more than his mother ever did. It was a scandal. Yes, everyone knew about her little moods. Sometimes, although he was just a child of 15, she would leave him alone for 1, 2, sometimes even 2.5 hours at a time. He covered the rejection with sociability. He always threw money around, his parents' money. I guess it was passive-aggressive, but God forgive me, I think it was justified. I mean, what did they ever do for Ralph anyway? The flip side of their rejection was a sort of false interest, Ralph would come home from school, and his mom would serve him cookies and milk. She'd ask him inane things, which nobody could have had any interest in. "How was your day? Learn anything interesting? Did you like the surprise I put in your lunch?" Surprise? Usually just some hard-boiled eggs. Ralph hated hard-boiled eggs, but he was too frightened of his mother to say so. In fact, he even ate the eggs, although they gave him terrible gas attacks. I believe he had Crohn's syndrome, although there was no name for it then. The questions would go on forever, sometimes even extending to Ralph's circle as we thought of ourselves. His father called us Ralph's gang of friends. Can you believe that? "You're the Plecker's little girl, aren't you?" she asked me once, that Joan Crawford smile stuck on her face like a decal. She'd put you in your place, little girl, like, "I'm an adult little girl, don't forget that." Hell, I was 12 already. God only knows what went on when there were no witnesses around.
Tad Tuner, age 15.
She was a bad seed, all right. Ralph's father was no help. He had this way of faking exhaustion, the very busy day routine. He stayed out of it no matter what. Like one time, I guess we were about 6 or 7 and I was sleeping over. What a joke. No one ever slept in that house. I was always afraid to shut my eyes and would lie shaking in my bed for hours. The only reason I went over there was because Ralph was my buddy and I felt bad for him. I think I'll bypass hell just for what I went through then. Like one time, she comes in, it must have been 9 o'clock at night, we were just turning in, and she just appears and she says, "You kids need a glass of water before you go to bed?" I mean, the face. The face was all sweetness and light. I get goosebumps just thinking about it. Anyway, we're at the kitchen table, and Ralph asks for a simple bowl of ice cream. His mom, she was always keen to destroy a weaker person's, a child's pleasure, says, no, he's already had 3 bowls. So he slams his fist on the table and screams at his dad, who is reading the newspaper, who's always ignoring us kids, a real dirtbag. Can he have a 4th bowl of ice cream? I think any rational person would have said, what's a simple bowl of ice cream? Ralph's father just says, do as your mother asks you. It was like that Peace in Our Time line, you know, play the little diplomat. Meanwhile, the female Hitler's running all over going crazy.
Wendy Bitts, age 15.
I feel weird saying this, my being female and all, but there was a strong anti-male atmosphere at Ralph's. His father was just about castrated, if you ask me. Always hunched up with that newspaper of his. It was sort of a wall. Ralph's mother, she called the shots, and she didn't like anything spontaneous. Like one time, Ralph slammed shut the door to the oven. I guess he was about 10 or so. Anyway, a cake that was in there fell. A cake that his mother claimed was for a dying old lady at her church. She put the guilt trip on him. She asked him if he could help her make a new cake. I mean, she did everything but put a dress and training bra on him. She had this oh-so-reasonable speech about this so-called lonely, so-called dying, so-called old, so-called lady, and how the cake would make her feel needed. And anyway, she said she and Ralph didn't get to spend enough time together anymore. Blah, blah, blah. I mean, it was a freak's guilt trip. Sugar is bad for the elderly. That woman was half-baked, in my opinion.
John Pothley, age 16.
The cake thing got around. You didn't need to be a genius to see the humiliation. This was our buddy. We hurt for him. Of course, I guess now everybody can see the tie-in to his so-called antisocial behavior. I mean, the whole kernel for everything. I see it centered on the oven. I have this image of Ralph staring into the oven, his eyes dilating. I think that something snapped or began to fracture inside. Although I wasn't there, I can sense that happening. That cake was like Ralph's life, a flat, brown, crumbly-assed disc.
Tanya Ebersol, age 15.
I think you have to define subjective terms like sociopath, third-degree murder, third-degree burn, premeditated, push, oven. What do these words mean if we disregard Ralph? And what do they mean if we disregard his mother? There are other words that we can all agree on, however. Words like neglect and motherhood. These words are ancient, carved in stone. So far, no one has dared to ask why this alleged Sunnydale social pillar was home baking cakes on a Sunday. A mother, a housewife, a middle-aged woman with leisure time on a holy day. I think things are structured in this society so that no one, and that includes judge and jury, will ask those hard questions.
You want to talk about horror and comedy and how well they mix, you look at this story. Because the thing I love about this is how deadpan the comedy is played, and as a result, how successful the horror becomes. And the more successful the horror becomes, the funnier it becomes, because it's a defense mechanism. The absurdity here is just beautifully realized, and it's beautifully realized because it's one step away from conversations we have. Familial angst refocused through a comedic lens is still familial angst. Absurd self-righteousness is still self-righteousness. The secret is to see the absurdity and not the seriousness with which it is delivered. That's how you stay safe. Don't focus on the puff-chested belief that the old ways are the best, or the old lady down the road is probably evil, or you should, read the Latin. That way lies madness. That way lies hell. That way, my friends, lies punditry. Thanks once again to our massive casts this week, and to the heroic Marty for going above and beyond, and then above and beyond again. Let's talk about money. We have two ways you can support us financially. One is clicking on pseudopod.org, clicking on Feed the Pod, and subscribing through PayPal. The other is doing the same thing through our Patreon page and subscribing, again, for both have the baseline level of $5 a month. And that gains you access to all our premium content, which is updated regularly. And it also helps us immensely, not just to pay our authors and cover our server costs, but to do the two big things we're trying to do this year. The first one of those is raise our pay rates. It's time. 6 cents a word has been the default for a long time, and authors are worth more. We want to be one of the companies that recognizes that, and hopefully leads what becomes an industry-wide raising of that particular rate. The second thing we want to do is pay our associate editors. Now, that is the official term for the folks who work the slush line for us. They are essential. They are unsung and unpaid heroes. People who deal with the first line of submissions, who pick the best out, pass it up the line, champion stories all the way along. It is an incredibly demanding job. I haven't done the math, but I believe somewhere in the region of a third of our current staff are either slushers or have been. They're essential to every magazine and every podcast that does what we do, and they are almost universally not paid, and we would love to change that. And again, in doing so, make the industry a little bit better. So when you help us, and that's great because we like being helped. But you also help change the course of an entire deeply weird, fractious, punkish, eccentric industry and change it for the better. And if you can do that, please do, either through PayPal or through Patreon. Failing that, because we are acutely aware that not everyone has the wherewithal to support us financially, there are other things you can do that only cost you time. Please leave us a review on iTunes or Google if you liked an episode. Likewise on Spotify, where we now are as well, because it's the future, and the future is sometimes great. Alternatively, tweet a link to an episode that you liked. Mention us on Facebook. If you have a blog or a podcast and you'd like to have us on, get in touch. We love being interviewed. We love showing up on other people's shows. You can help boost our signal, and by doing that, help boost people's awareness of us, because the more of those reviews we have, the more likely we are to be further up the algorithm. Further up the algorithm we are, the more discoverable we are, the more people come to us. And the more we can keep doing this. And that's all down to you. So whether you can help us financially or whether you can help us socially, please consider lending a hand, because believe me, not only is it always very, very gratefully received, but it is always needed. We will be back next week with The Undertakers by Rudyard Kipling, read by the mighty Wilson Fowley, and audio production by Marty Perrett once again. Then, as now, we will be a production of Escape Artists Incorporated and released under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives license. And we leave you with this line from The Babysitter. This would go viral. I mean, nobody's done human sacrifice. People have always done human sacrifice. Yeah, but, not in America, with hot people. We'll see you next week, folks. Until then, have fun.
Show me
It's a pseudopod. It's a big foot.
It's all about podcasts these days.